The hourglass hidden behind the temple gate. It is said that there are some gates in this world that no longer lead anywhere in the way we understand distance. They do not open into cities or courtyards or bustling roads. They open instead into a feeling, into a rhythm the world once knew and has since forgotten. Tonight, we walk toward such a gate. At the edge of a forgotten desert valley where the dunes gather like slow sleeping waves, a shape rises from the sand. It is not grand in the way of palaces. It does not pierce the sky with spires or boast of its own endurance. It stands simply, two worn stone pillars and a broken lintel that has long since crumbled into soft, scattered dust. Once, that lintel crowned the entrance as a single unbroken beam. Now, only the faint memory of its weight rests in the air between the pillars. But if you look closely, if you let your eyes soften in the light of late afternoon, you will see that the stone above the gap still holds an outline, a slender shape, carved into the rock with reverent hands many centuries ago. An hourglass. Its edges are almost gone, smoothed by wind, faded by sun. Yet it lingers, like the echo of a breath held too long. The desert wind moves through the broken pillars, brushing against the old symbol, carrying a question from one side of the valley to the other. What time was kept here? And who was meant to tend it? You stand just before the threshold. The sand around the gate is marked with subtle spirals, as if the wind has been practicing in its own calligraphy. The pale sky stretches overhead, soft and high, marked only by a faint crescent moon, barely visible in the brightness of day. As you take a step forward, passing between the pillars, crossing the invisible line where the lintel once cast its shade, something in the air changes. It is not a sound. It is not a touch. It is more like a shift in the weight of the world upon your shoulders. A sense of softened gravity settles over your senses, as though the air itself remembers a slower rhythm. The desert light seems to thicken, becoming less harsh, more diffuse. Your breath falls into an easier pattern. Your thoughts begin to uncoil. On the far side of the gate, the valley opens into what was once a temple courtyard. What remains now are fragments, shards of polished stone catching the light, broken columns rising waist-high from the sand, a faint suggestion of walls long since returned to dust. Yet there is something deliberate in the way the stones lie upon the ground. They are arranged not in chaos, but in gentle spirals. Smooth pieces of marble, slender tiles of onyx and quartz, placed in slowly widening circles, as though someone once laid out the pattern of a whirlpool and then stepped back to let time pour into it. You walk slowly along the outer edge of one of these spirals, your feet sinking lightly into the warm sand. It is said that the people who built this temple believed that time was not a force to fight against, not a predator to fear, not a river that would sweep them away if they did not hurry. They believed time was a companion, a presence to be soothed, spoken with, listened to. Their priests, according to old stories whispered among scattered tribes, were known as keepers of the breath. They listened to the desert's exhale, the wind slipping over dunes, the cooling of stone at dusk, the quiet settling of dust after the footfalls of caravans. And they marked its length in grains of luminous sand. In the center of the courtyard, half buried by drifting dunes, you notice the curved lip of a stone basin. You brush aside a thin veil of sand and reveal its surface. Within the basin, the grains are finer, pale and almost shimmering, as though mixed with ground crystal or faint starlight. A thin groove winds its way from the rim of the basin down into its heart, a kind of channel through which sand once flowed in a slow, deliberate stream. It might have been called an hourglass if it stood tall, contained between glass bulbs. But here it lies open. Time, in this place, was never fully enclosed. Their rituals, whispers tell us, did not measure hours in the way we now count them on clocks and screens and crowded calendars. They marked moments of presence, the time it took for a worried heart to find stillness, the space between one question and the next, the measured length of a shared silence between friends beneath the rising stars. Each ceremony began with a pause. The priests would gather in the courtyard as the day leaned toward evening, their robes the color of baked earth and faded saffron. They would stand at the rim of the basin, listening, truly listening, to the desert's breath. Only when they heard that long patient inhale and exhale passing over the stones and through the sparse grasses would they lift handfuls of luminous sand and let it slip slowly from palm to basin. They watched not the amount, but the falling itself, the way the grains drifted, the way they settled, the way they formed soft patterns upon one another. Their measure of time was the depth of their attention. You wander deeper into the ruined temple, beyond the courtyard, and into a shadowed hall whose roof has partially fallen in. Stone pillars line the path, their tops broken, their bases half covered by creeping sand. On each one, partially worn away, is the same carved symbol, an hourglass, sometimes upright, sometimes inverted, sometimes tilted sideways, as if to say, time turns, but not always in the way you expect. Fragments of inscriptions cling to the walls, words half erased by wind and grit. You run your fingers gently along the grooves of one such inscription, feeling each curve and gap, each place where meaning has slipped away. Only a few phrases remain legible, though they are not in a tongue you know. Yet, in the hush of the hall, their intention feels close enough to touch. Beneath the silence, they whisper an almost understood teaching. That time was once a tender current, not a river of demand. In one corner of the hall you find a low stone bench. Above it, carved into the wall, is a series of small, simple images, one after the other. A hand resting over a heart, a breath drawn in, a breath released, an eye closed, a spiral, a crescent moon. It is a sequence, a ritual in pictures. Some believe this was the forbidden teaching of the temple, not because it was dark or dangerous, but because it was too gentle for a world that increasingly worshipped urgency. Other cultures built monuments to conquest, to speed, to the relentless march forward. But here, in this quiet valley, this small civilization carved instructions for moving slowly. For those who entered the hall seeking guidance, the priest did not offer dates or decrees. They offered practices. Sit, breathe, look toward the horizon. Count not the ticks of a device, but the pulses of your own being. To outside eyes, this sounded like idleness, like refusal. Over time, as faster empires rose and spread, temples like this one began to be seen as suspicious. Why gather to honor something that could not be taxed or measured or sold? The teachings of gentle time were quietly discouraged, then branded as unhelpful, then left out of chronicles altogether. And so, like many forms of wisdom, they sank beneath the sands. You walk the length of the hall, your footsteps barely audible against the soft cushion of dust. Sunlight filters through cracks in the ceiling, falling in narrow shafts that slowly inch along the floor as the day progresses. Watching those slow-moving beams, you begin to feel what the priests may once have tried to share. Time, in this place, does not feel like a fixed line racing towards something. It feels like light gradually crossing a stone, like a shadow stretching until it melts into night, like the slow cooling of sand beneath the rising moon. Everywhere, the temple speaks in quiet symbols. The spiral patterns of shattered tiles in the courtyard, the hourglass carved into the gate, the tiny crescent moons etched along the edges of broken steps. It is as if the architecture itself was designed to remind those who entered that life was not meant to be hurried through, but gently unwound. In the deepest chamber of the temple, partially collapsed walls reveal a skylight, an opening directly to the sky. It is small, no wider than the span of 2 hands, but perfectly placed. When you step beneath it, the world narrows to circle and stone and light. It is said that during certain nights, when the moon was full and high, its pale face would shine directly through this opening onto a waiting basin of sand below. Not an instrument to measure how quickly the moon moved across the sky, but an invitation to watch how slowly light can travel from one realm to another. The priests called this the hour of gentle forgetting. Those who sat here beneath the falling moonlight were encouraged to lay down their worries one by one, like grains slipping from fingers. The past was not something to cling to. The future not something to race toward. All that mattered, for that one slow hour, was the feeling of light upon the skin and the breath moving in and out. You stand now in that same spot, imagining the pale glow of the moon touching your face. The sky above is still, a faint wash of color at the edge of evening. Around you, the broken temple stirs only with the smallest sounds. The hush of sand settling, the whisper of wind through a cracked doorway, the distant cry of a bird crossing the valley. Time, in this moment, does not feel like something outside you, chasing you. It feels like something you are resting inside, like a chamber, like a cloak, like a slow warm tide. Perhaps you think the people who built this place were not trying to escape time at all. Perhaps they were simply trying to remember how to live with it without fear. As the light dims further, you make your way back toward the gate. The hourglass above the pillars is now barely visible, its outline blending with the colors of evening. You pause just before stepping through, back into the valley and its endless dunes. The question returns, gentler this time. What time was kept here, and who was meant to tend it? Maybe no one tended it in the way we expect. Maybe there were no schedules, no alarms. Only a few quiet souls who agreed to sit still long enough to feel the desert's breath and remember that rushing is not the only way to move through a life. Beneath the silence, you feel a small shift inside you, as if some tightly wound thread has loosened by a single precious turn. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, this temple of unwound hours. Perhaps it exists only in memory and story now, reconstructed in your imagination on the edge of sleep. Yet the feeling it offers is very real. That time may not always move forward with urgency, that in sacred, forgotten corners of the world, and in small, forgotten corners of the self, it can pause long enough to let us breathe. And as you move away from the gate, back into your own night, you carry with you a soft, enduring thought. You do not always need to chase the hourglass. Sometimes you may simply sit beside it, watch the grains fall, and let your heart discover its own gentler pace. The chamber where clocks learned to sleep, it is said that in forgotten ages, there were places where even time was invited to lie down and rest. Not stopped, not shattered, simply soothed, like a restless child guided into sleep. Tonight, we walk toward one of those places. The journey begins at a moonlit threshold. You stand before a low stone arch, half buried in the shoulder of a rocky hill. Around it, the desert night lies quiet and vast. Dunes stretched out in muted waves of sand, beige, and shadow. The sky above a deep dusk sky blue, scattered with distant patient stars. The arch itself is simple, carved from sandstone worn smooth by wind and age. No inscription shouts from its face. No guardian statues stand to impress or frighten. Only a narrow band of carved spirals traces along the inner curve, faint as a memory, catching just enough moonlight to reveal their gentle winding. Beyond the arch, a dim glow beckons. Not the harsh glare of modern light, but a soft, uncertain shimmer, like the last embers of an old fire remembering how to burn. The moon hangs high above, marked by the scars of ages, pouring its pale breath down upon the threshold. The air is cool, breathable, patient. You step forward. As soon as your foot crosses the shadow of the arch, the sound of the outside world loosens. The faint whisper of night wind over dunes becomes distant. The wide mouth of the desert tightens into something more intimate, like a hand closing softly around yours. You begin to descend a short flight of stone steps, each one varnished by time into a gentle curve where countless feet once passed, slowly, never in haste. At the foot of the stairs, the chamber opens. It is a stone room, circular and low, its ceiling supported by short, sturdy pillars, carved directly from the surrounding rock. The air is cool and carries the faint scent of metal, old silk, and dust. The dust of years, not neglect. In the far corners burn small lanterns set into alcoves, their flames dim and steady, casting long, quiet shadows that cling to the floor like resting animals. The light they give is enough to see by, but not enough to disturb the hush that has settled here like a veil. Arranged along the walls and on low platforms of stone lie instruments, not clocks in the form you know. No glass boxes filled with springs and cogs, no sharp ticking hands. Instead, you see delicate bronze circles wrapped in faded silk, their surfaces engraved with tiny star-marked symbols and spirals. Some are the size of your palm, others as wide as a shield. Each one has a pair of thin hands, also bronze, resting motionless as though caught mid-exhale. Many of them are half preserved beneath blankets of dust, the fine powder draped across their faces like a soft shroud. Some lie within carved recesses in the stone. Others lean gently against pillars or rest atop folded cloths, now brittle with age. They are quiet. Not broken, you sense, just quiet. As you move into the chamber, the silence gathers around you. Not an empty silence, but a comforting one. Full, like an echo that has chosen to stay. Whispers tell us that this was once the hall of those who believed time could be lulled into gentleness. That these devices were crafted not to enforce hours, but to honor pauses. You move closer to one of the instruments. its silk wrapping frayed and its metal dulled to a greenish oxidized bronze. The hands rest at no clear position. They do not point to midnight or noon or any familiar division. They lie somewhere in between, as though the device was caught in the act of sighing and never asked to finish. You imagine the artisans who shaped it. Careful, patient souls working by torchlight, etching spirals and constellations into the face, measuring not with rulers but with breath. It is said that the people of this hidden temple watched the passing of days differently than their neighbors. While other kingdoms built tall obelisks to mark shadows on the ground, while other cities bristled with bells that called workers to rise, to labor, to rest, this place turned its attention inward. The artisans here believed that time, when treated with kindness, could become a partner instead of a tyrant. They made these bronze circles, wrapped them in soft cloth, and placed them in niches around the chamber. When the lanterns were lit, the metal would reflect the flicker of flame, and the still hands would cast thin, trembling shadows across the walls. In those shadows, the priests and visitors of this temple saw not the relentless march of minutes, but the shifting shapes of inner life, moods, questions, quiet realizations. On the inner walls of the chamber, murals unfurl in muted clay red and faded ochre. You step closer, letting the lantern's glow reveal them. Time is not drawn here as an hourglass or a wheel of seasons or a line running from birth to death. Time appears as a living spirit. In one panel, it drifts through a starlit field. A tall, serene figure with closed eyes, its body made of swirling spirals and thin lines of light scribbled across the dark. Where it walks, tiny stars bloom behind it, shimmering in misty clusters. In another, time is shown reclining beside a river that winds through a valley of crumbled stone. Its hand trails through the water, disturbing it only enough to send gentle ripples outward, never a wave. Around these scenes, small human figures sit or lie in raw, restful poses. They are not rushing toward time, nor fleeing from it. They are sharing space with it, breathing with it. Beneath the silence, the murals echo the beliefs of this place. That time is not a predator, but a guest. One to be welcomed, listened to, and sometimes allowed to sleep. You notice that in each depiction, the spirit of time's eyes remain closed, as if it too is meditating. Fragments of broken instruments lie scattered in a corner, half covered by drifts of dust like fallen leaves. You crouch beside them, a snapped bronze hand, curled slightly at the tip, a fragment of a ring etched with tiny star symbols, pieces of silk that once wrapped the mechanisms like cocoons. Some believe these broken remnants suggest a peaceful rebellion, that the people here had once felt the tightening grip of a world obsessed with counting. Counting coins, counting victories, counting losses, counting each heartbeat in fear of the last. And chose, quietly, to create a different kind of timekeeping. One that honored pauses, one that trusted rest. The instruments their artisans crafted measured not how long a task took, but how deeply it was felt. Not how many moments passed, but how many were truly inhabited. The broken pieces now suggest a final act, not of violence but of release. Perhaps, as outer kingdoms fell into war and trade grew loud and brittle, the keepers of this chamber chose to lay their instruments down, to let them sleep, to invite time itself into slumber. On one side of the chamber, a smaller doorway leads into a second, even more dimly lit room. You step through, your shoulders brushing the smooth stone. This inner chamber is almost bare. Only a single instrument rests here, cradled in a shallow bowl carved into the floor. It is larger than the others, and its bronze face is cleaner, as if someone wiped away the dust more recently than the rest. Its hands lie intertwined, not pointing outward, but gently meeting at the center. Above it, carved into the rock of the ceiling, is a spiraled pattern studded with tiny reflective stones. When the moon is high, its light must slip through the cracks in the rock and catch these fragments, sending small dim stars winking down onto the instrument below. It is said this was the heart of the chamber, a place where the most devoted of the temple's keepers came to let go of time altogether, to sit in the circle of lantern light beneath the ceiling of artificial stars and allow their thoughts to fall quiet, until the movement of internal time softened to almost nothing. Some nights, whispers tell us, they would gather here simply to listen to each other breathe, to synchronize their inhales and exhales until the room itself seemed to inhale and exhale with them. Their goal was not trance or trance-breaking vision. It was gentleness. To experience, if only for an hour, a world in which nothing was demanded of them by the ticking of unseen clocks. You sit for a moment on the cool stone beside the large sleeping device. The silence in this inner room is thick, but not oppressive. It feels padded, cushioned, as if sound, should you make it, would not echo harshly, but sink gently into the walls. Like a stone dropped into deep water. You do not speak. You feel, instead, the way your breath slows, the way your shoulders drop, the way your thoughts unfurl and drift away, like ribbon carried on the faint currents of air. It occurs to you that the artisans here might have hoped for exactly this to happen to anyone who found their resting chamber, that their rebellion against the strictness of measured days would ripple quietly into some unseen future, touching not many, but a few, softly and exactly where needed. As you rise and return to the main chamber, the lantern light seems warmer. The bronze circles, with their motionless hands wrapped in faded silk, appear less like broken technology and more like sleeping animals, still alive, merely choosing not to move. You imagine the last day of this place. Perhaps the last keeper walked slowly around the room, touching each instrument in turn, thanking it under their breath for the moments of stillness it had helped create. Perhaps they wrapped the silk more tightly, whispered a blessing, and gently laid each circle flat, so that dust could one day cover it like a blanket. They would have snuffed some lanterns, left others burning low, enough to keep the chamber from falling into absolute darkness. Then, when all was prepared, they might have walked out beneath the moon, stepping carefully over the threshold, trusting that time, in this place at least, had been tuckered into a long, gentle sleep. You stand again at the base of the stairs, looking back into the chamber where clocks learn to sleep. The air around the instruments feels still, but not dead, as if at any moment, if needed, they might stir. Not to resume their old duties, but to demonstrate once again how time feels when it is not pushing. Beneath the silence, a quiet wonder begins to grow. Perhaps the world once held a softer understanding of time, one that did not demand endless productivity, one that did not tie worth to speed, one that allowed days to end simply because evening had come, not because some invisible tally had been satisfied. You climb the worn stone steps. The moonlit threshold appears once more, framing the desert night like a painting. The first breath of outside air brushes your face, carrying with it the wider sounds of the world. The faint hiss of wind, the distant rustle of hidden creatures, the immense, unhurried turning of the sky. As you step back into the open, you feel that time has resumed its familiar flow around you. Yet, something inside you remains touched by that chamber below. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by many. Perhaps it was meant for those who, like you tonight, stood at the edge of weariness and wondered if there might be another way to be in time, rather than always racing through it. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some rooms only reveal their purpose when we are tired enough to want to rest. And some hours, like the ones preserved quietly in that dim stone chamber, exist not to be counted, but to remind us that both the mind and the moments around it are allowed, gently, reverently, to sleep. The archivist who counted only sunrises, it is said that in certain deserts, the dawn does not simply arrive. It is invited. It is noticed. It is greeted as carefully as a guest. Tonight, we walk into a place where someone once devoted their entire life to doing just that. The chapter opens with a solitary figure carved into stone. They stand at the entrance to a half-buried hall, their form emerging from a weathered pillar that leans gently toward a horizon now lost to drifting sand. The desert has worn their features, softening the lines of the cheeks, smoothing the hands pressed lightly together. But the eyes remain. They gaze not down at the visitor, nor inward in self-concern, but outward, toward a horizon that no longer shows itself. Sand has risen where sky once met earth, a pale veil drawn across the line that used to divide night from day. Even so, the stone eyes are fixed there, as if still awaiting something. At the statue's feet lies a slab of stone tilted at an angle, held in place by dunes that have gathered around it like a sleepy tide. It is not inscribed with dates, no columns of years marching in neat order. Instead, it bears a series of small carvings, arranged in a patient sequence. A circle shaded half in soft gold, a wider arc of pale rose, a scattering of thin feathered lines like silvered cloud. Then again, another round of pale gold. Here, someone once recorded not days but dawns. Each symbol is small but carved with care. Each one different, like a series of subtle portraits. The face of morning, changing from one day to the next. Whispers tell us that this stone figure is the last memory of an ancient archivist. Not the keeper of ledgers and laws, not a chronicler of wars and treaties, but the quiet guardian of sunrises. It is said they believed the world could be understood not through the strict counting of days, but through the gentle noticing of light. You step past the statue, leaving its unblinking gaze on the buried horizon behind you. A narrow passage leads inward, cut into the rock. Its floor, a smooth channel worn by sand and the soft tread of countless feet. The air inside is cooler, resting in the shade. The desert's bright glare melts into dusky amber, lit by faint shafts of light slipping in through cracks and hollows in the stone above. As you move deeper into the passage, your breath begins to align with the hush that lives here. There is no echo, no clamor. Only the soft, low sound of your own movement and the faint, distant sigh of wind passing somewhere far overhead. The corridor curves, then opens. You emerge into a chamber that feels like the inside of a held breath. The hall is long and quiet, its walls carved with shallow alcoves set at a comfortable height for human hands to reach. In each alcove rests a scroll, or what remains of one. Their edges are browned, their skins cracked, their cords faded to the color of old dawn light. None bear titles in bold script. No grand subjects are announced. Instead, each alcove is marked with nothing but a simple sunrise symbol. Some are small, a thin crescent of light behind a low line of hills. Some are white with rays stretching up like gentle fingers. Some are just a soft, pale gove, barely distinguishable from the stone around it, unless the light touches it in just the right way. It is as though each scroll is labeled not by its topic, but by the quality of the dawn in which it was written. You walk slowly down the length of the hall, lantern or imagined lamplight brushing gently along the alcoves. Here, the Archivist stored stories of mornings. It is said that this Archivist lived in an age when others became obsessed with counting. Neighboring cities carved timelines onto temple walls, inscribing the victories and failures of rulers in long, uncompromising rows. Merchants scratched numbers into tablets, measuring time in days and days in profit. Priests elsewhere marked calendars with festivals and fasts, turning the year into a grid of obligation. But in this hidden valley, beneath a gentler sky, one person chose a different work. They rose before the first light, day after day, and walked out to a high stone ledge overlooking the open sand. There, wrapped in a cloak to shield themselves from the night's lingering chill, they watched the east. It might have been a simple line at first. Dark meeting dark. Then, slowly, the faintest thinning of shadow. A breath of color. Soft rose, silver cloud, a trembling gold that never arrived in quite the same way twice. The Archivist would watch, noting the curve of cloud, the mood of the dawn's first hue, the way the light touched the dunes. Sharply or gently, reluctantly or with sudden, eager brilliance. Then, when the sun had climbed high enough that the spell of the first light was broken, they would return to the hall and record it. Not as a date, but as a feeling. On parchment, they would write, "The morning when the sky woke slowly, as if from heavy dreams," or "The dawn when the light was thin and questioning, and the wind did not move," or "The sunrise that arrived like a promise kept, after many days of cloud." These words, perhaps, now sleep in the scrolls, nestled in the alcoves around you. Travelers came. They followed stories carried by caravans, stories told at night beside low desert fires, stories of a quiet hall carved into stone where time was not counted but felt, of a solitary archivist who did not ask where you had been or how much you had accomplished, but only, "What has the light been saying to you lately?" Some arrived exhausted, eyes dimmed by years of chasing things that never paused long enough to be fully held. They would sleep first, on woven mats laid along the cool floor of the outer chamber. Then, when they were ready, the Archivist would lead them, in the earliest breath of dawn, to the ledge above the desert. They would stand in silence. Nothing required of them but to watch, to notice, to feel the first touch of light on their skin, and the sand, and the distant crumbled stones. No sermons, no lectures, only the dawn. On the walls of the chamber, between the alcoves, soft engravings tell this story in pictures. In one carving, A small group of figures stands at the edge of a cliff, all facing the same direction, their bodies wrapped in cloaks, their heads tilted slightly upward. Behind them, carved faintly, a city lies in miniature, its towers and walls barely visible, as if fading. Before them, the sky curves in sweeping lines, reaching down to meet the horizon in a gentle embrace. In another panel, you see the Archivist alone, seated with a scroll across their knees, a small sunrise symbol hovering above the parchment. Around them, the walls are bare of dates, bare of lists. Instead, small birds are etched in flight, their wings open, their paths looping. Here, time is shown not as a straight road with milestones and endpoints, but as light moving across a landscape. Always returning, always slightly changed, always arriving to wash the world in a new way of being seen. As you walk along the hall, the notion settles over you gradually, like dust drifting down in slow circles. Time, to the Archivist, was not a ruler. It was a painter. Each sunrise, a fresh stroke across the same familiar canvas. Each morning, a quiet message left on the threshold of the day. They taught that each sunrise carried a different message for the heart. Some mornings were for courage, when the light broke through low clouds, insistent and bright. Some were for grief, when the sun rose pale and veiled, the air holding the weight of unspoken things. Some were for rest, when the dawn seemed reluctant to arrive, lingering in that blue-grey in-between that feels like a long, soft exhale. Travelers, after days or weeks spent here, returned to their own lives, remembering not the number of nights they had stayed, but the quality of the mornings they had shared with the Archivist. The morning that tasted like forgiveness, the morning that felt like a door finally opened, the morning that quietly said, "You do not have to carry it all today." You pause beside one alcove where the sunrise symbol is carved more deeply than the others. The scroll it guards has almost completely crumbled. Only a roll of fragile dust remaining. But above it, etched into the stone, is a rare line of text in a tongue that old scholars have translated only partially. It reads something like, "Here we keep the dawn for those who have forgotten how it feels." Beneath the silence, the meaning lingers. This hall was not merely an archive. It was a refuge, a place to remember what the world can look like when it first wakes. Outside, you can imagine, the Archivist's work might have seemed trivial. While armies marched and markets bustled, while emissaries travelled with urgent letters and judges hammered out decisions, this one person sat quietly and watched the light. Yet, in another way, their work touched a deeper layer of history. For long after the names of war leaders faded, after monuments crumbled and records cracked in the dry air, the dawn continued to arrive. Pale gold, soft rose, silvered cloud, renewal etched across the sky. The Archivist's true subject was not the events that attempted to define an age, but the eternal act of beginning again. As you near the end of the hall, the alcoves grow fewer, and more of the wall surface stands bare. Here, the engravings grow larger, the stories fewer, but more expansive. One final panel catches your eye. It shows the Archivist in old age, their shoulders bent, their staff resting loosely in their hand. They are no longer watching the horizon. Instead, their head is tilted slightly inward, eyes closed, as if the sunrise has taken up residence somewhere behind their ribs. Above their figure is carved a simple symbol, a small circle, half made of lines like rays and half left plain. Beneath it, a spiral, turning inward. Some believe this suggests that the Archivist's last lesson was that the outer dawn and the inner dawn are not separate. That as we watch the world change from dark to light, there is an echo of that same transformation in the quiet places of our own being. You return, at last, to stand once more before the stone figure at the entrance. The winds have begun to pick up outside, pulling thin sheets of sand across the exposed slab at the Archivist's feet. The carved phases of dawn are slowly becoming veiled. Pale gold, soft rose, silvered cloud. Soon, perhaps, the symbols will sink beneath the surface entirely, joining the long list of things that the desert keeps hidden. And yet, even as they disappear from the stone, something of them remains in the air, in the valley, in you. Beneath the silence, a realization ripples through your thoughts. Perhaps the greatest markers of time are not the numbers we write in ledgers and calendars. Perhaps the truest record is the quiet unfolding of light across our inner skies. The way we notice the mornings that feel different. The way we remember the days that began with a particular softness or a sudden, blazing clarity. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by historians of conquest and chronology, this small sanctuary of sunrises. Perhaps it was meant instead for those, like you tonight, who feel weary of counting and long in some quiet part of themselves, to simply stand at the edge of their own horizon and watch how the light arrives. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them in gentler tones. Some archives cannot be opened with keys of logic, but only with slow breaths and open eyes. And as you step away from the hall of the archivist who counted only sunrises, you carry with you a silent invitation to let tomorrow's dawn be more than just the start of another day. To let it be, for a fragile, precious moment, a message written in light just for you. The spiral of hours lost beneath the sand. It is said that in the quietest corners of the desert, where the wind moves like a slow breath across the dunes, the sand remembers the footsteps of those who once sought refuge from the weight of their own hours. Tonight, we walk toward one of those places. The chapter opens beneath a moon that hangs low and luminous. Its pale glow spreading across a landscape of sand-beige dunes that rise and fall like the soft curves of a sleeping ocean. The silence is deep here. Not empty, but full, like a bowl of still water reflecting starlight. In the midst of this wide, ancient quiet, a shape begins to resolve itself beneath the moon. A spiral, carved into the desert floor. Its grooves, so faint that even the sun cannot reveal them. Only moonlight, with its gentler touch, slips across the sand at just the right angle to call the shape back into view. It is not large, not grand, just a simple pattern wound into the earth by hands long since returned to dust. But the closer you step toward it, the more it seems to shift. As if its lines are not fixed, but slowly unwinding, softening, breathing. Whispers tell us that this spiral was once the threshold of a hidden temple. Not a temple of gold, nor one of stone towers and roaring fires, but a sanctuary, carved into the earth itself. Built for those who carried burdens too quiet for the world above to notice. A place where the hours themselves were invited to loosen their hold. You approach the spiral. Your shadow stretches long across its outermost curve. The sand, touched by moonlight, glimmers faintly. A soft echo of long ago footsteps. And then, without force, without command, the spiral seems to beckon you inward. It is said that in forgotten ages, pilgrims came here in silence. They did not come seeking prophecy, nor answers from deities carved in marble. They came because the world beyond the dunes moved too quickly, demanded too much, measured their worth in tasks completed and hours endured. Here, time was not counted. It was witnessed. You step into the first curve of the spiral, and the sand beneath your foot feels cool, smooth, held in place by centuries of wind and ritual. As you walk its winding path, your breath begins to settle into slow, easy patterns. The desert night seems to inhale with you. The spiral exhales. Step by step, you follow the gentle arc inward. The spiral turns again and again, carrying you deeper into its quiet logic. Legend says that pilgrims walked this pattern until their troubles dissolved like grains in the wind. With each turn, they left behind a fragment of their burdens, a fleeting worry, a quiet sorrow, a question that no longer needed answering. Not cast aside violently, but released softly, as sand slips through open fingers. At the spiral's center, the sand dips slightly, revealing the edge of a stone platform half buried beneath time. You kneel, brush away the fine dust, and feel the cool surface beneath your palm. Faint carvings appear, circles within circles, not quite perfect, each one echoing the spiral outside. This stone once served as the entry point to the hidden temple. And indeed, just beyond its edge, you find a narrow passageway descending beneath the dunes. The air grows cooler as you step inside. Sand gives way to smooth stone. Your footsteps echo softly, then fade, as though the walls themselves are absorbing the sound with ancient tenderness. You emerge into a wide circular chamber, and immediately sense the presence of countless lives that once moved through this place. The floor bears shallow impressions of circling footsteps, soft, overlapping traces etched into stone worn smooth with time. No footprints rush, none overlap in haste. They form an unbroken pattern of calm movement, spiraling inward, then outward again. This was a temple of hours, not to be kept, but to be softened. The temple beneath the dunes, the chamber is lit only by the thin strands of moonlight slipping through cracks high above, creating pale, dust-marked beams that drift like celestial ribbons. Along the walls, murals have faded into whispers of their former color. But their shapes remain. Spirals. Always spirals. Some wide and open, others tight and intricate. Like the turns of a seashell or the coil of an untouched scroll. On a tall, cracked pillar, a mural shows a group of figures walking the spiral in unison, their heads bowed, their faces calm. Above them, time is not drawn as a line. It is a circle, with no beginning, no final point. It is marked not by numbers, but by phases of light. A circle shaded in dusky rose, another in pale gold, another darkened completely, as though symbolizing the hour in which one must turn inward to find clarity. Further along the wall, a vessel lies half broken. Clay fragments showing spiral symbols on their sides, once used to carry sand into the chamber for ritual release. Even the collapsed pillars, scattered across the far corner of the room, fall in arrangements that echo the turning shape. It appears this civilization believed time itself was not linear, but circular. Each moment, revisiting the next, with subtle differences. And because of this, they believed something even more radical, that the hours we lose do not disappear. They circle back to us, changed, waiting quietly to be reclaimed when we are ready. A forbidden rhythm, but whispers tell us that this belief was forbidden. Outside the desert, empires rose that valued strict order. Hours counted, days carved into calendars, years written as ladders, ascending upward toward conquest. A circular understanding of time made them uneasy. If time was not a single arrow, but a spiral, then endings were never absolute. Failures could return as opportunities. Losses might come back as quiet gifts. A broken empire could rise again from the place where it fell. For rulers who wished to control history, this was an unbearable idea. So they forbade it, erased it, covered it with sand. They buried the spiral in the hope that the shape would vanish. But the desert, patient and ancient, does not obey such commands. Beneath the silence, it holds memory. It waits, walking the hours. You step further into the chamber, feeling the quiet gather around you like a kind embrace. Those centuries separate you from the pilgrims who once walked here. You sense their presence. Not as ghosts, but as echoes of a shared human longing that transcends time itself. The longing to slow down, to release, to begin again. You try following their path, a slow circle around the chamber's edge. Your footsteps fall into the impressions left behind. Your breath grows soft. Your thoughts float, unhurried, like feathers carried on a low tide of air. In the gentle turns, in the circular rhythm, in the repetition without monotony, something loosens inside you, not completed, not solved, just unwound. You continue until the movement becomes a meditation, just as it once was for those who needed to let hours slip from their tired shoulders. Perhaps they walk because time outside the temple pressed heavily upon them. Perhaps they walk to find the quiet center of the spiral where time does not push but pauses. Perhaps they walk because they understood what we are only now remembering. Time does not always flow like a river. Sometimes it curls like tide. Sometimes it returns like a thought you were not ready for the first time it arrived. After a long while, you find yourself in the chamber's center. Moonlight falls directly through a crack above, casting a pale circle of light at your feet. The dust drifting through the beam moves in slow spirals, tiny galaxies turning in miniature. You stand in the heart of the spiral, feeling the stillness settle in your lungs, your bones, your mind. There is no revelation here, no booming voice from the past, no inscription telling you what to believe. Only the soft suggestion that the world is not as rigid as it sometimes seems. Perhaps the hours we lose in worry, in haste, in longing, are not destroyed. Perhaps they are simply waiting to return. As new chances, new mornings, new ways of being gentle with ourselves. You take one last look at the murals, the clay shards, the circular paths worn into the floor. Then you climb the stairs, back to the spiral above. The desert night greets you with a soft breath of cool air. The moon has climbed higher, marking the sky with its serene authority. The spiral on the sand glows faintly beneath its light, enduring though worn. As you step away, you carry with you a quiet stirring of possibility. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by the eyes of hurried empires. Perhaps it was meant instead for wanderers, dreamers, and sleepless hearts seeking a softer way to move through time. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And some truths, like the spiral of hours lost beneath the sand, do not arrive all at once. They return, again and again, each time inviting you a little closer to the center. The astronomer who measured the night's breath. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, there were once people who believed the universe had a heartbeat. Not loud, not forceful, but soft. Soft enough that only the patient, the quiet, the deeply attentive could ever hope to hear it. Tonight, you walk toward one of the places where such listening once took place. Under a sky scattered with starlight, you find yourself at the edge of a vast and shifting desert. The dunes stretch out in gentle waves, curving beneath a moon marked by silver scars. The wind moves lazily, dragging faint trails of dust that shimmer like drifting constellations close to the ground. Half swallowed by these dunes sits the remains of a domed observatory. It leans slightly, its once perfect roof partially collapsed, its stone walls veiled by the slow creeping breath of sand. The uppermost part of the dome is broken, a wide circle open to the sky through which moonlight spills like liquid silver down into the chamber below. You step closer. The opening in the roof glows faintly, illuminating the dust-laden air in the hollow beneath. Through this single, unblinking eye, the sky looks down at the ruins with ancient calm. The observatory walls still curve in graceful arcs, their stones warm from the day's heat, cooling now beneath the quiet touch of night. As you enter, the temperature drops slightly, and a thin, echoing silence settles around you. Not empty, but expectant, as if the room remembers how to listen. Inside the observatory, strange instruments lie abandoned in soft arrangements of dust and moonlight. A star-marked disc, half buried near the center of the chamber, gleams faintly. Its surface is etched with circles and spirals. Not rigid paths, but flowing lines that trace the gentle drift of celestial bodies like rivers across the night. Nearby, delicate rods lie scattered, each one carved with tiny grooves, each one once fitted into precise arrangements that aligned with stars now lost to the shifting sands of memory. Against the curved wall, smooth stone bowls rest in a patient row. Their insides bear faint stains from water long evaporated. Some bowls still hold a thin trace of silver dust, as though they once reflected the sky itself, capturing constellations in trembling pools of moonlit water. It is said that the astronomer who worked here did not count stars for calendars or navigation. He was not concerned with marking seasons or predicting harvests or mapping empires. He listened, not with ears, but with the quiet behind them. The astronomer believed that if one sat here long enough, beneath the breath of the desert wind and the turning sky, one could hear a deep, slow rhythm. A pulse that moved through the heavens like the inhale and exhale of something unimaginably vast. He called this rhythm the night's breath. Not a metaphor, but a truth felt in the bones. Some nights, pilgrims would say, the astronomer sat so still that the sands themselves crept up to listen beside him. You move deeper into the observatory. The moonlight falling through the open roof forms a wide circle on the stone floor. Dust motes drift lazily through the light, turning in small spirals as though themselves entranced by the slow dance of the cosmos. The deeper your footsteps carry you, the more the room seems to shift from ruin to memory. The instruments, though broken or buried, seem to hum faintly. A low, almost imagined vibration that tingles in the air, as though they are remembering, long after their last use, what it felt like to be touched by stars. Along the inner curve of the wall, you find a pillar broken at its midsection. On its remaining surface, a carving glimmers faintly in the pale light. It is a pattern of spirals, one inside another, each one marked at intervals by small star-like symbols. Between the spirals, lines flow like breath drawn in and released. Below the carving, half buried beneath sand, is a line of inscription. Time has softened the characters, but their meaning lingers like a memory. It reads, "The sky exhales what the heart remembers." You rest your hand upon the stone. There is no warmth, no pulse, and yet something beneath the silence feels alive. Further along the wall, another pillar displays a different carving. This one shows a figure standing under a sky filled with swirling stars. The figure's hands are open, palms raised, as though catching a falling invisible tide. Around the figure, tiny lines radiate outward, suggesting sound, or perhaps sensation. Some believe this was meant to depict the astronomer himself. Others claim the figure represents time, not as a straight line or a strict measure, but as a gentle presence and always breathing around us, waiting to be felt. At the base of the carving is another inscription. Though eroded, its meaning is whispered in ancient stories. Where memory fades, the stars remember. You close your eyes and let that thought linger. Perhaps the astronomer believed that the heavens did not hold answers, but reminders. Not instructions, but invitations. You walk to the deepest part of the chamber, where the shadows rest thickest. Here, the starlight from above is thin and diffused, barely touching the floor. A single stone bench waits in this quiet corner, its top worn smooth from the weight of 1,000 long nights. This was the astronomer's seat. He sat here night after night, listening for the breath of the cosmos. He claimed that the universe exhaled time in slow, steady pulses. And if one breathed carefully enough, one could match its rhythm. Not to gain control, but to find peace. To fall into harmony with something far older and far wiser than any kingdom or empire. Visitors who dared to join him said the experience was unsettling at first. The silence too deep, the stillness too complete. But gradually, the air took on a different quality. The night grew soft. The stars seemed to drift closer. And then came the sensation that time itself had loosened, as if their hours no longer pressed upon them like a burden, but swirled gently around in small forgiving eddies. Some claimed they left the observatory feeling lighter than they had in years. Others never spoke of their experience, not because it frightened them, but because the language for it did not exist. You settle onto the bench for a moment, letting your breath fall into its natural rhythm. The observatory grows still, utterly still. A deep quiet gathers around you, lined with dust and starlight and the soft echo of centuries-gone footsteps. And in that stillness, your breathing begins to soften. In, pause, out. The subtle, slow pattern mirrors the faint movement in the dust-laden beams of moonlight above you. A rise, a fall, a drifting, a settling. It occurs to you in a way that is not sharp but gentle. That perhaps the astronomer was not listening to the stars as much as he was listening through them. Listening for the spaces between their movements, for the quiet inside each flicker, listening for the shape of time when stripped of urgency. Maybe he heard something we have forgotten how to perceive. Not a ticking, not a marching forward, but a breathing, a slow, steady breath woven into the fabric of the night. After a time, you rise from the bench and walk back toward the circle of moonlight on the chamber floor. The dust still drifts in soft spirals. The instruments lie quiet, their star-marked surfaces catching brief glints of silver light. The dome whispers its ancient memory of nights when this room was filled not with decay, but with wonder. When the astronomer traced constellations in the reflections of water-filled bowls. When he aligned rods to the faintest pulse of a distant star. When he taught visitors not how to measure time, but how to feel it. How to breathe with it. You climb the stairway back toward the desert night. The dunes glow faintly in the moonlight. The sky stretches above you, vast and soft and endless. And somehow, standing beneath the cool breath of the night, you feel a subtle change inside you, a loosening, a quieting. Perhaps time is not the strict ruler we often imagine. Perhaps it breathes. Perhaps it drifts. Perhaps it sighs like the wind over sand and pulses like the tide beneath stars. And perhaps, if we ever choose to listen as the astronomer once did, we may yet rediscover that soft, forgotten rhythm. Some voices only echo when we are finally still enough to hear them. You take one last look at the domed ruin, half swallowed by shifting dunes. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by those seeking power or certainty. Perhaps it waits only for wanderers and night thinkers and weary souls seeking something quieter than knowledge, something more like understanding, something carried not in numbers, but in breath. As you step away, the desert wind rises softly, as if exhaling, and you walk beneath the starlit sky, carrying with you the gentle possibility that time itself is alive, waiting beneath the silence, for us to remember how to listen. The keeper of the door. Between moments, it is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, there were doors that did not open onto roads or courtyards or sky. Doors that were never meant to be crossed with footsteps, but with breath, with stillness, with the soft unraveling of the mind. Tonight, you stand before one of them. The journey begins deep within the inner chambers of an ancient temple, a place half claimed by silence and softened by the slow settling of centuries of dust. No torch burns here. No wind moves. Only a faint amber glow bleeds gently through thin cracks in the ceiling, where broken stone allows slivers of distant, muted daylight to trickle downward like forgotten blessings. This pale light spills across smooth walls, carved with faint spirals, its warmth stretching long shadows across the room. Shadows that drift and bend like thoughts rising and dissolving. And there, at the heart of this hushed chamber, stands the outline of a door. Not a door with hinges or knobs or wooden planks. Not a door meant to swing open or shut. It is simply a shape carved into the stone wall. A tall, narrow frame whose edges are worn smooth by the passage of countless hands. As you draw closer, you notice how the grooves shimmer faintly, as though touched by the memory of those hands more than by light. Fingers once traced these edges with reverence, with longing, perhaps with quiet fear. For this is not a doorway to the outside world. It is a threshold to something inward, A legend whispers through the chambers. There was once a keeper of this door, a silent guide who knew how to loosen the stitches of time. This keeper, it is said, stood here not as a guardian, but as a companion to those who sought to step between moments rather than simply through them. Some claim the keeper could hear the tremble of a person's thoughts before they even spoke, and could sense the exact instant a traveler became ready to release the weight they carried. Others say the keeper never spoke at all, that the presence alone was enough to lead one into a deeper quiet. Tonight, in the amber-dappled air, you stand where they once stood, before the door that was not a door. The chamber sighs with old warmth. You step slowly into its center, feet brushing over ancient stone that ripples faintly with fine lines. Grooves that echo the faint spirals carved on the walls, as if the entire room is gently circling itself. Above, dust drifts quietly in the amber light, spinning in currents too soft to feel. On the walls, murals unfurl in muted clay red and oxidized bronze tones, barely preserved by time, but still readable in their dreamlike simplicity. You follow them with your gaze. One mural shows a figure stepping through a painted gateway into a landscape of swirling shapes. Oceans made of clouds, paths curling like breaths, mountains rising from veiled starlight. Another shows figures standing before the carved door, hands resting on their hearts, eyes closed, as if listening to something beneath the silence. In one of the most faded scenes, a line of travelers appears to dissolve as they pass through a symbolic threshold, their forms stretching and folding, losing their contours as they move beyond the limits of ordinary time. Whispers tell us the scribes of this temple believed that at certain hours not marked by sun or moon, but by the inner tides of a person's mind, the boundary between moments grew thin. At such times, those who were ready could slip through the small hidden spaces between one heartbeat and the next. It was not a trick, not magic, not a disappearance. It was a soft shift, a yielding, a letting go, as if time itself stretched open its hands to offer a brief, luminous pause. The door carved into the wall was merely a symbol, a reminder that the true threshold lived somewhere behind the eyes. You run your fingertips along the carved door's edges. The stone is cool, almost cold. Yet beneath the chill, you sense a deeper warmth. The warmth of old presence, like the faintest echo of a held breath. You close your eyes. The chamber deepens around you. There is no sound, only the slow settling of dust and the gentle throb of your own pulse. Perhaps this is what the keeper once listened for. Perhaps the door is not meant to be opened but felt. You open your eyes again and continue exploring the chamber. In the far corner, half buried beneath drifted sand, you find a cluster of stone bowls, once used to hold water for reflection. Their surfaces are cracked, but inside them lies a thin layer of dust that has settled in smooth, delicate spirals, echoing the carvings on the floor and walls. It evokes the idea that everything in this place was shaped around the same quiet truth. Time is not a river that drags everything forward. It is a breath. Inhaling, exhaling, pausing. And in those pauses, entire worlds of experience can unfold. Further along the wall, you find another mural. This one shaped like a map of shifting paths. Lines curl inward, branching into smaller paths, each leading to a painted archway with shadowed interiors. It is a map of possibility, not geography. Some believe the paths represent different moments in a life. Choices once made, choices yet to be made, choices still quietly waiting behind the door of the mind. The keeper, it is said, never told a traveler which path to choose, only how to listen for the moment the right path began to hum. Because the scribes believed every moment in time carried its own resonance, its own quiet signal, like a chord struck gently by an unseen hand. Those who walk through the inward door learn to feel that resonance deep within their breath. You make your way back to the door outline, standing before it as so many once did. The spirals carved into the shallow walls around it seem to glow more brightly now, catching the shifting angles of the amber light. You notice something new. The spirals are not perfect. They wobble slightly, curve unevenly, break and resume in strange, gentle ways. It is as if the artisans who carved them were not seeking symmetry, but honesty. The honesty of a breath, the honesty of thought, the honesty of a moment that expands or contracts depending on the heart that inhabits it. The temple was a place where seekers came to loosen the rigid measure of their days, to let hours breathe differently, to slip into a hush that no clock could keep. And always they came here together. No one entered the inward door alone. Not truly. The keeper was always present, their silence held like a lantern. Standing here now, centuries later, you sense that silence still lingers, thin, faint, but steady. Like a soft echo waiting for the right moment to speak. You sit down on the cool stone floor, resting your back against the wall just beside the carved door. The amber light above dims slowly as a cloud passes over the distant sun, sending flickering shadows drifting across the murals. The chamber breathes. You breathe with it. It becomes easy, easier than you expect. To imagine the keepers standing here, their presence neither commanding nor passive, but quietly attentive, watching you without judgment, listening for the moment your breath and the room's breath fall into the same soft rhythm, a rhythm that is not about counting, not about progress, not about direction, just presence, just being. In this quiet, you begin to feel something loosen, not in your limbs, but somewhere deeper. A small letting go, a tiny shift, like a door beginning to open on silent hinges. Perhaps that is all this place ever offered. Not revelation, but readiness. Not answers, but stillness enough to hear the question you have carried. Perhaps the scribes did not create the chamber to teach travelers anything new, but to unteach them the speed at which they had learned to live, so that in the thin boundary between one moment and the next, they might find a place to rest. You rise slowly. You stand again before the carved door. It does not open, yet somehow you feel it has already opened for you. Not outward, but inward. As you walk back toward the outer chambers of the temple, the amber light softens behind you, and the silence follows like a gentle companion. The murals fade into shadow, the spirals dissolve into darkness, but their impression stays. A whisper lingering in your breath. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by those seeking answers. Perhaps it was meant for those seeking pause. Some voices only echo when we are quiet enough to hear them. Some doors only open when we stop trying to push. And some thresholds, like the one hidden in this chamber, exist not to lead us outward, but gently within. The room where shadows refuse to move, it is said that in forgotten places, where the desert winds move like slow breaths across the earth, there are rooms where silence gathers so completely that even shadows dare not move. Tonight, we enter one of them. The chapter opens with a haunting, sacred stillness. You find yourself standing before a stone threshold buried half in drifting dunes. The temple around it has long since surrendered to the sand, its outer walls eroded into soft curves that catch the dusk sky's fading light like the edges of a sleeping creature. Only one entrance remains, a narrow, arched doorway, touched by shadows that stretch long and thin across the sand. Shadows that do not sway, though the lantern at your side flickers gently in the wind. You step inside. Beyond the threshold lies a circular room, half ruin, half memory, its ceiling held aloft by worn pillars carved with spirals and star-marked runes. Soft lanterns nestle within alcoves carved into the stone walls, their flames shifting with the breeze. But the shadows these lanterns cast, the long angled silhouettes stretching across the room, remain perfectly still, unmoving, as though time in this chamber has chosen not to flow. The air is thick with quiet, not oppressive, not heavy, but ancient, like the air inside a sealed jar that has not been opened for 1,000 years. A hush settles over your thoughts. Every sound grows dim. Even your heartbeat feels softer. Beneath the silence, you sense a presence. Not watching, but simply waiting. It is said that this room was shaped by priests who sought to anchor time in moments of deep contemplation. They believed that a moment held long enough, held with full attention, full presence, could leave behind a shadow that would not fade. And so they created this room where the shadows of their thoughts could remain. You move closer to the nearest wall. Carved into the stone are silhouettes, but not of bodies. These are not human forms. There are no faces, no arms, no legs. Instead, the shadows etched into the stone are elongated shapes, subtle curves, abstract impressions. Some resemble spiraling currents, as though thoughts were caught mid-turn. Others stretch like long threads of memory, woven into the stone grain. Some look like burdens, heavy sloping shapes with jagged edges that press downward. Others resemble rising breaths, thin and lifting like the moment a person releases a long-held sorrow. Whispers tell us that these wall markings are not carvings at all. They are echoes. Shadows left by thoughts held so deeply that they imprinted themselves upon the stone. The priests who built this room believed that some ideas, the ones too fragile to be spoken, too delicate to survive the harshness of air, could be preserved only as shadows. A thought spoken aloud could be misunderstood, twisted, lost. A thought held silently, with intention, with reverence, could remain intact long after the thinker had gone. As you walk the circular path around the room, your lantern casts a warm glow across the stone. The shadows on the wall do not move. Not even a flicker. Your own shadow stretches behind you, long and soft. Yet it remains obedient to your movement, dragging across the floor as you step. But the others, the ones carved into the walls, remain still, unchanged, untouched by any shift of light or motion. It is as if they are not shadows at all, but memories, clothed in darkness. You kneel before one of the longest shapes. It rises from near the floor and arcs upward in a graceful curve, narrowing to a point near the ceiling. It calls to mind the shape of an exhale, the moment when breath softens into release. Perhaps this was the shadow of a burden finally let go. Perhaps it belonged to a pilgrim who came here carrying a sorrow too vast for words. Some believe that the priests taught visitors how to cast such shadows, that they would kneel in the center of the room, hands resting lightly on their knees, eyes half closed, and wait for the moment when their thoughts stopped racing, when they breathed deeply, slowly, and allowed their minds to grow still. In that stillness, a thought would form. Not a hurried thought, not a noisy one, but a thought that rose from the very center of the chest. A thought that was ready to leave, as the pilgrim held it. Not speaking it, not naming it. The thought took form in the lantern light and drifted toward the wall. And there it remained. A shadow of what needed to be released. A shadow of what they no longer wished to carry. You rise, your footsteps soft against the stone. The room is not entirely dark. The lanterns in their niches emit a steady, warm glow. The kind of light that resembles a home long left behind. Yet the shadows they cast stretch across the floor and up the walls in ways that feel unnatural. Lantern flame wavers. Shadow stays. You move slowly, allowing yourself to feel the strangeness of this place. It is said that the stillness here is alive. That silence, rather than absence, is a presence in its own right. You place your palm upon the wall, touching a shadow etched in stone. It is cool, smooth, yet you sense something beneath the surface. A faint ache, a memory of a feeling that once sought refuge here. A long sigh, a prayer unspoken, a question without an answer. You pull your hand away gently, as if not wanting to disturb a sleeping animal. In another corner of the room, you notice a cluster of smaller shadows, pressed close together, like petals of a dark flower. These, whispers say, were the shadows of ideas that several pilgrims once held together. Communal meditations, shared contemplations, dreams spoken in silence between people who wished to understand the same mystery. Perhaps they were seekers trying to understand the passing of seasons, or the turning of stars, or the feeling of love that arrives without warning and dissipates just as softly. No one knows. The priests who once tended this room kept no written record. Their teachings were passed through quiet gestures, not etched into scrolls. They believe that what gives life meaning cannot be captured by ink, only by breath, only by stillness, only by what remains after the moment has passed. As you continue circling the chamber, the air grows even quieter. It is a silence thick enough to touch, a silence that has weight, like a blanket wrapped around your shoulders. Yet it is not choking. It is soothing, a silence that feels as though it has been waiting for someone to notice it, for someone to sit with it without fear. You lower yourself to the floor near the center of the room and breathe. The lantern light glows softly. The stone beneath you is cool. Your shadow stretches behind you just as it should. But the room's shadows remain frozen, each one an imprint of something left behind. Something held. Something released. Something remembered by the stone. You close your eyes. The quiet hums. Not audibly, but like a sensation behind your ribcage. You sit with it. You breathe with it. time loosens its grip. Moments stretch, moments fold. You begin to understand, not with words, but with something more subtle, why pilgrims once came here. Not to escape the world, but to let the world grow quiet enough for them to hear their own thoughts without fear. To let their inner burdens settle into soft, unmoving shapes. To let their shadows finally learn stillness. When you finally open your eyes again, nothing has changed, and yet everything feels different. The shadows still lie in the walls, unmoving, unchanged. The lanterns still glow. The dust still drifts softly through the amber light. But something inside you has shifted. Perhaps it was never meant to be seen in the blinding clarity of explanation, this room where shadows refuse to move. Perhaps it was meant to be felt, like a soft echo in the hollow of the chest. Perhaps the scribes built this chamber to remind travelers that some parts of ourselves cannot be spoken aloud, only released quietly into places that know how to hold them. As you stand, your own shadow follows you, stretching gently across the floor. For a moment, you wonder, when you leave this room and step back into the world of moving hours, will your shadow remain just a shadow? Or will some faint imprint of you quietly linger here, joining the countless silhouettes that have taken refuge in this place? Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some rooms only reveal their meaning when we surrender to their silence. And some shadows, like the ones carved forever into these walls, continue teaching long after the person who cast them has drifted into memory. You take one last look at the still dreaming chamber. Then, without rushing, you step through the threshold, leaving behind a silence that will continue long after you fall asleep. The Hall of Unfinished Hours, it is said that there are moments in life that refuse to finish themselves. Moments that linger on the edge of becoming, half-formed, half-fading, as though uncertain whether they belong to the past or to the future. Tonight, we wander into a place where such moments were honored rather than feared. A place the old scribes called the Hall of Unfinished Hours. Moonlight glides like a soft hand across a long, narrow hall, revealing rows of stone benches arranged in quiet procession. The air is cool here, still holding the breath of the centuries that have settled like a patient layer of dust. Each bench bears a carved symbol, but none a whole. Their lines trail off mid-curve, sharp edges soften into nothing, spirals stop just before completion, as though the sculptor had paused mid-stroke and simply walked away. The moonlight follows the arc of one symbol, then another, each carving ending in silence. The question rises in the hush of the corridor, unbidden yet inevitable. Why leave hours uncarved? The hall offers no answer in words. Only a hum in the stone and a whisper in the dust that seems to say, because some moments were never meant to be sealed. You take a step forward. Your shadow stretches long across the cold stone floor. But even it feels gentle here, as though softened by the unfinishedness that surrounds you. The long corridor narrows ahead, its far end swallowed by veiled darkness. The only markers guiding your way are the moonlit glimmers touching the unfinished symbols on each bench. Whispers tell us that the scribes of this temple were not scholars in the traditional sense. They did not write histories. They did not keep precise records of decisions, laws, or the passing of kings. Instead, they devoted their lives to studying the subtle shifting quality of time. Not its measurement, but its texture. For them, an hour was not a 40-line segment etched into stone. It was a breath, a fleeting shimmer in the mind, a feeling, and feelings, they believed, should not be carved into permanence. Thus, the rows of benches in this hall were gishued with symbols representing hours. Not hours measured by clocks, but hours as they exist in the heart. The hour of hesitation, the hour of longing, the hour of quiet grief, the hour of joy too fragile to name. None completed, for each was meant to remain open, alive, soft at the edges. Walking among the unfinished, as you wander deeper into the hall, the incompleteness becomes strangely soothing. There is no demand for perfection here, no insistence that life must be tied neatly into ordered bundles of time. Instead, the hall seems to whisper with every footstep, buds. Much of life rests in the in-betweener, in the pauses, in the moments that refuse to conclude. Shadows drift across the floor as clouds pass before the moon. But the silence does not break. On one bench you find a symbol shaped like a crescent, its curve beginning to turn inward before stopping abruptly, like a sigh interrupted. On another, a spiral ends mid-turn, its path open, unfinished, inviting your imagination to complete it, or to leave it as it is. The scribe's nightly rituals in the corner of the hall lie broken candlesticks, their bases weathered with age, their metal darkened by time. Each one tells of long nights spent in contemplation. It is said the scribes often gathered here at dusk, lighting dozens of candles whose flames flickered in uneven rhythms against stone walls. They would sit on these very benches, scrolls resting on their knees, yet leaving most lines unwritten. Some nights they would sit in silence for hours, with a single phrase caught like a fishhook in their thoughts. A thought they dared not carve into stone, lest they trap it before it found its true shape. Other nights they would draw symbols in the sand spread across the floor, watching the grain shift as they traced ideas that fluttered on the edge of clarity. These symbols were never meant to last. The wind or the passing of a robe's hem would erase them within moments. But this was the point. Some truths, the scribes believed, were too delicate to be fixed. Better to let them drift between one breath and the next. Murals of the in-between along the hall's far wall. Murals stretch in gentle flowing lines. Their pigments faded into soft clay red and muted bronze. The artwork shows no battles, no kings, no monumental victories. Instead, it depicts people kneeling beside circles of sand, their fingers tracing symbols that blur even as they are formed. One mural shows a figure's hand hovering above a half-drawn line, as though deciding whether to continue or release the thought altogether. Another shows a scribe watching the dawn from a temple ledge, unwritten scrolls at their side, their expression peaceful, accepting that not every idea needs shape. The murals speak a quiet language. Some hours are complete only when left unfinished. You walk until the moonlight grows thin and the hall darkens into a soft blur of shadow. Here, at the hall's end, you find no grand altar, no monument, no final declaration. Only one last bench, one last unfinished symbol. It curves almost into a circle, almost, before drifting into open stone. You sit. The silence shapes itself around you, warming the edges of your thoughts. Perhaps it was never meant to be carved, this final hour. Perhaps it was meant to breathe. You look back down the length of the hall. Rows of benches, rows of half-formed hours, rows of ancient invitations to let life be fluid rather than fixed. As your breath deepens, You feel yourself soften into the gentle truth the scribes once cherished. Some hours do not need closure. Some experiences are not meant to be completed, understood, or named. Some moments simply drift, softly, into the next. You rise from the final bench as the moon begins to slip behind a cloud, its last threads of light dancing along the walls. The unfinished symbols glow faintly, as if remembering their makers. As you step back through the corridor, your own shadow stretches behind you. Not entirely still, not entirely defined, but soft, open, unresolved. Just like the hours this hall was built to honor. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some hours, like the ones carved here, are meant not to be counted, but to be felt, and then gently released into the quiet turning of the night. The sanctuary, where days were gathered, it is said that in forgotten corners of the world there were sanctuaries where time was not measured, but gathered, gently, reverently, like water cupped in patient hands. Not the time marked by calendars or sundials, not the time counted in hours or seasons, but the essence of days, their moods, their breaths, their quiet truths. Tonight, you step into one such place. The chapter begins with a haunting image. A long, vaulted hall carved from pale stone, its ceiling lost in soft shadow, its floor cool beneath drifting layers of dust. Along the hall stand tall clay jars. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. Each one sealed with a faded cloth bound by fraying twine. Though their surfaces are worn, the jars possess a quiet dignity, as though they have guarded something precious for far longer than human memory can stretch. Near the base of each vessel, you notice faint inscriptions. Not dates as we know them, but symbols. Tiny suns, half moons, spiral of wind, flecks of starlight carved so delicately they shimmer in the lantern glow. This is the sanctuary where the priests of an ancient order collected the essence of days. Not the events of those days. Not victories, not losses, not births or deaths. But the moods that lived beneath them. Joy, sorrow, anticipation, stillness, restless longing, quiet contentment, emotions held in clay, like rainwater saved in earthen bowls. You stand at the threshold, and the air feels different here, slightly thicker, as though carrying the weight of countless unspoken stories. Beneath the silence, you sense an echo, a hum, a presence, waiting to be acknowledged. You move softly into the sanctuary, your footsteps making almost no sound. The jars stand like tall sentinels, arranged in thoughtful clusters. Some are slender, others wide-bellied and ancient. Their surfaces bear the marks of time, of weather, of devotion. On one jar, a carved sunburst glows faintly in the golden hour light, filtering through a high, cracked window. Its label is almost unreadable, but you can feel the warmth held within. The echo of a day filled with laughter and bright sky. Another jar bears only a crescent moon, its lines soft, its edges blurred. This vessel feels cool to the touch, resting peacefully in its corner. You pause before a third jar, marked with a swirling symbol. A spiral descending inward. A breath seems caught inside it. A day that once folded upon itself in contemplation or quiet sorrow. Some jars tremble faintly in the gentle desert draught that slips through the cracked stones above, as though the memories inside them are eager to be heard or remembered. It is said the priests of this order devoted their lives to observing the intangible shape of a day. While others charted histories in strict lines and dates, these priests listened to the emotional currents beneath them. They believed that each day held its own subtle flavor, some sharp like winter wind, some soft as dusk, some restless as drifting sand. And they sought to preserve those delicate essences, not out of fear of forgetting, but out of reverence for what might otherwise go unnoticed. A chamber for joy, you step into a smaller alcove, where several jars are marked with rising sunbursts and tiny upward spirals. The air here feels lighter, as if carrying a faint sweetness. You kneel beside one jar, its surface warm even in shadow. The symbol for joy, a small open circle, rests upon its belly. It is said that within such jars rested the memory of days when the world felt simple, when one woke with lightness in the chest and nothing heavy in the mind. Days filled with laughter or companionship, or a sense of gentle rightness that needed no explanation. The priest did not seek to trap joy or turn it into something to be hoarded. They preserved it so that in darker seasons, one could return and taste again the sweetness of a forgotten morning. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of the jar settle into your palms. A faint glow seems to pulse beneath the clay, as though happiness itself still breathes within it. A chamber for sorrow, the next hall feels heavier. Here, the jars bear the symbol of a teardrop, elongated and elegant, carved with such tenderness that sorrow itself seems to soften in their presence. The air grows cooler. Shadows deepen, clinging to the edges of the floor, pooling gently beneath each vessel, like the quiet settling of a grief. You approach one jar, its surface slightly cracked. Legend says the priest believed sorrow should never be banished or ignored, but tended gently, held with care, like a fragile flame. Inside such jars rested the essence of days touched by loss, but not defined by it. Days when grief arrived like a low tide. Soft, steady, see, filling the world with a quiet ache. Days meant for remembrance. This place does not feel heavy in a painful way. Only tender, like the hush of someone who has learned to carry sorrow without letting it drown them. You rise slowly, letting the chamber's cool breath linger in your lungs. A chamber for anticipation. Next, the air subtly sharpens, a hint of electricity drifting through the gloom. Here, the jars are marked with tiny forward curving spirals, symbols of expectancy, of moments on the cusp of becoming. These jars feel almost alive. Some tremble gently in the faint draft, as though holding days when the heart beats slightly faster, waiting for news, for a return, for a beginning. You touch one lightly. A warmth spreads up your fingertips, like the faint thrill of a long-awaited dawn. The priest believed that anticipation was a sacred state, neither past nor future, but the fertile ground between, the place where hope takes its first breath. You smile without meaning to. The jar seems to hum, a chamber for stillness. Then the mood shifts entirely. This hall feels like a held exhale. The jars here bear the simplest symbol of all. A single horizontal line. Stillness. Here, the very air feels suspended. Dust hangs in frozen drifts. Your footsteps make no sound. The jars are smooth, their surfaces cool and unblemished, as if untouched by turmoil. The priests once came here to learn the art of listening, not to what was said, but to what lay beneath the silence. For in still days, they believed, the essence of time gathers itself, revealing truths too quiet for busier hours to reveal. You rest a hand on the one jar, and a shiver runs through you, not of cold, but of recognition. This is the essence of a day when nothing dramatic happened, and yet the world felt aligned, clear, gentle. The kind of day that slips through memory unless one pauses to honor it. Unlabeled jars. The forgotten days, at the deepest end of the sanctuary, you find a small room. Here, the jars stand in imperfect rows, their surfaces cracked, their symbols long faded or erased entirely. These are the forgotten days, days whose moods no longer have names, days swallowed by dust, days that once mattered, but whose meaning drifted like sand carried by wind. You approach an unlabeled jar, it trembles faintly, as if holding a memory that can no longer articulate itself. Was this a day of conflict, of quiet triumph, of wandering, of healing? No one knows. Yet the jar holds something, some trace of having been lived, and in this faint trembling you feel the truth. Even days that seemed ordinary or unremarkable carried an essence worthy of preservation. Perhaps especially those days, for they form the fabric of a life. As you retrace your steps through the sanctuary halls, the jars hum softly at your passing. Not with sound, but with presence. The warmth of joy, the coolness of sorrow, the spark of anticipation, the quiet of stillness, and the unresolved tremble of the forgotten. Each essence moves through you with gentle, hypnotic rhythm, like waves washing over shore. At last, you stand again at the hall's entrance, the moon now low on the horizon, its light shifting from silver to a faint, muted gold. You look back one final time. The jars stand silent and patient, guardians of innumerable days collected like soft echoes of lives long gone. Perhaps it was never meant to be discovered, this hidden archive of moods and moments. Perhaps it was built for those who sense that every day holds something precious, even if it slips past unnoticed. As you leave the sanctuary behind, you carry with you a tender realization. Days we forget are not truly lost. Somewhere beneath the sands of our own memory, their essence remains quiet, gentle, waiting. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some days only reveal their meaning long after they have passed. And as sleep begins to gather around you, soft as drifting dust, you feel that the sanctuary's truth has found a place within you. A reminder to treat each day's mood as something sacred. Not to fix or carve or measure, but simply to honor. The temple's final hour, it is said that some endings do not close like doors. They dim and soften and loosen their grip on the world, slipping quietly into silence the way the last grain of sand falls in an hourglass turned on its side. Tonight, we step into one of those endings, a final hour that does not break but exhales, a moment that lingers in the air like the fading warmth of a long-burned lantern. The story begins with the soft toll of a stone bell, not a sound that strikes the ear, but one that trembles faintly in the bones. An imagined resonance woven into the quiet air of an ancient place. It is the bell that was said to ring only when a temple surrendered itself to time. And so, beneath a sky marked by the pale half-moon, you step into the vast hall of a sanctuary, taking its final breath. Sand lies scattered across the floor in delicate dunes, caught in ripples as though shaped by the slow turning of forgotten years. The hall stretches wide before you, walls rising like the ribs of a sleeping giant. The ceiling above shattered in places so that moonlight pours down in silvery shafts onto broken pillars and crumbled inscriptions. The air feels suspended, as if the moment of abandonment never truly ended. As if the keepers walked away only a heartbeat ago, though centuries have since drifted through the cracks. Your footsteps enter the silence like feathers falling. Each step seems to echo softly, merging with a stillness that has grown patient over time. Whispers tell us that this temple's final hour was not marked by collapse, nor grief, nor violence. It was marked by choice, a choice to let silence issue what words no longer could. You walk deeper into the hall, the moonlight guiding your path in thin silver notes. Fallen pillars lie where they once stood proud, carved with star-marked patterns, now softened by drifting sand. In certain places, the pillars have collapsed in perfect rings, as if they lowered themselves gently rather than fell in chaos. The inscriptions carved into the walls, lines of spirals, crescents, and delicate glyphs, are fractured, half buried, veiled by time. Yet even in ruin, they seem to hum, a faint memory beneath the stone, a soft echo beneath the silence. Some carved panels show robed figures tending to hourglass-shaped vessels, sand slipping slowly through the narrow neck in an eternal dance. Others depict circles of priests seated beneath the moon, hands outstretched as though releasing something invisible back into the night. It is said that these were the final keepers, those who tended the temple not for power or glory, but for the quiet work of preserving a sacred understanding of time. But when the world beyond the dunes grew loud with conquest, when kingdoms rose and fell with violent haste, the keepers knew their teachings would no longer survive intact. And so they decided not to let their knowledge be broken by misinterpretation or misused for ambition. They chose instead to dissolve it, not erase it, but return it to the silence from which it came. The final ritual moonlight glints off a long, low altar, crafted of sandstone yellow and cracked along its edges. Around it lie the faint remains of ceremonial bowls and star-shaped markers that once guided the keepers in their final ritual. In the scrolls that survived, tattered fragments found buried in distant dunes, there is mention of a night when the priests gathered in this very hall, each bringing the teachings they had safeguarded, the cycles of breath and time, the art of releasing burdens, the way shadows could speak truths unshaped by the tongue. But that night they did not recite their knowledge. They did not carve it into stone. They did not store it for later generations to unearth. They released it. They untied the scrolls and let the desert wind carry the pages like drifting petals. They turned the hourglasses over, not to measure time, but to free it, letting the sand fall where it would, no longer constrained by glass or ritual. Some whisper that in that final moment, the hall glowed with a light not born of flame or moon, but of release. That the teachings rose like dust carried upward by a sudden breath of air, and disappeared into the night as if the universe itself had inhaled them. The keepers left afterward, not in mourning, but in trust. Trust that truth, when released, finds its own path. trust that knowledge does not always need to be held to survive. Walking in the stillness, you pause in the center of the hall. A fine layer of dust sparkles in the moonbeam above you, turning slowly as though caught in a silent spiral. You inhale. The air tastes faintly of stone and age, yet something lighter floats beneath it. Like the after scent of extinguished incense, the silence presses gently against your skin, not demanding anything from you, only wrapping you in its endless patience. Perhaps this is what the keepers felt on the night of their final hour. Not sorrow, not loss, but a deep stillness. The kind that arrives when one has chosen the right moment to let go. You look around the hall and notice something subtle. Nothing here feels dead. Nothing feels forgotten. It feels resting. As though the temple is lying in wait, not for rediscovery, but simply for the next soft breath of wind to pass through its chambers. It is the rest of something that gave all it needed to give. Something that still hums quietly beneath the silence, echoes in the dust. As you continue walking, your footsteps leave faint impressions in the sand-coated floor. Yet almost immediately, the next drift of air softens them. This hall has learned to smooth the past, to let moments dissolve gently rather than cling. You run your hand along a fallen column. Its surface is cool, crumbled at the edges, yet the spiral carved into it still holds the faintest shimmer. A memory of moonlight from an age long past. Farther along, a broken mural shows only half a figure. Reaching outward, palm open, fingers extended toward nothing. The rest of the image has been lost to a crack in the wall, but something about the gesture feels clear. A release. A farewell. A blessing. Perhaps this figure represented the final keeper. Or perhaps it represented time itself, offered back to the quiet. The murals, the carvings, the very dust in this hall all seem to echo the same truth. Nothing has been destroyed. Everything has simply been returned. You stand at last beneath the shattered roof, the moon shining down through its broken ribs like the lantern of a sleeping god. The night wind slips through the gap, lifting dust in soft curls that drift towards the open sky. Perhaps this is the temple's breath. Perhaps this is its final hour, continuing to unfurl. Not ending, but becoming. As the wind carries a thin trail of sand upward, you imagine it as a whisper. The last remnants of the teachings released long ago. Still wandering, still circling, still finding their way through the quiet places of the world. And perhaps, if one listens carefully enough, some of that ancient knowing can still be felt. Not as information, not as doctrine, but as a gentle sensation, a soft stirring beneath the heart, like the memory of something once understood and born again in dream. You turn toward the entrance, moonlight guiding you through fallen pillars and scattered inscriptions. Behind you, the vast hall lies still, but not empty. The temple has not ended. It has simply chosen to rest. And as you step back into the cool night air, the wind lifts slightly, carrying a thin veil of dust across the threshold. It drifts like a quiet blessing, like knowledge freed, like the soft exhaled breath of a sanctuary content. At last, some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some truths, the gentlest ones, must be released to be understood.